What would you do if your HOA suddenly decided that the modifications you legally installed on your own home were unacceptable and ordered you to tear them down? Now, imagine that modification was something you needed just to enter and exit your house. That's exactly what happened to me when my HOA, led by a power-hungry president, tried to force me to remove my wheelchair ramp, something that wasn't just a convenience, but a necessity. I followed every rule, got every permit, and did everything by the book, yet that didn't stop them from waging a campaign against me. This is the story of how I fought back. I moved into my neighborhood 5 years ago when I was still able-bodied. At the time, accessibility wasn't something I ever thought about. It was a nice, well-maintained community, the kind of place where every mailbox was the same shade of beige and where the HOA had an iron grip on everything from fence height to what kind of flowers you could plant in your front yard. The rules were strict, but I didn't think much of it. That changed 3 years ago when a car accident left me with a permanent spinal cord injury. Suddenly, my home, the place I had planned to spend years in, became an obstacle course. I couldn't get up the steps to my front door, couldn't navigate certain spaces, couldn't even leave my own house without assistance. So, like any rational homeowner, I did what needed to be done. I hired a contractor, got approval from the city, and even submitted my plans to the HOA's architectural committee, just as the bylaws required. The ramp itself was professionally designed to match my home's aesthetic. The materials were the same as my porch, the railings were identical, and unless you were looking for it, you wouldn't even notice it was there. It wasn't an eyesore, it wasn't disruptive, and most importantly, it allowed me to live independently. At first, everything seemed fine. The ramp was installed without issue, and I settled into my new reality. Some neighbors even expressed support, telling me they were glad to see the HOA had allowed such a reasonable accommodation. For a brief moment, I thought that would be the end of it. I thought, maybe, just maybe, common sense had won. I was wrong. Enter Karen. She moved into the neighborhood about 6 months ago and wasted no time making her presence known. She campaigned aggressively for the HOA board presidency, promising to restore property values and preserve neighborhood standards. People seemed to like her energy at first. She attended meetings, organized cleanups, and talked a big game about making the community better. But once she was in power, her true colors started to show. It began with petty citations, mailboxes that were half an inch too high, fences that were slightly the wrong shade of brown, but it didn't take long before she set her sights on something bigger. And unfortunately for me, that something was my ramp. It started with a letter. A crisp white envelope with the HOA's official letterhead, slipped neatly into my mailbox as if it were just another piece of routine correspondence. But as I read it, my stomach dropped. Violation notice * unauthorized modification. The letter informed me that my wheelchair ramp had not been approved by the HOA and needed to be removed within 30 days or I would face daily fines of $100 until it was gone. The reasoning? The ramp allegedly disrupted the architectural harmony of the neighborhood and hadn't gone through the proper approval process. I read it over and over, my fingers gripping the paper so tightly that the edges crumpled. This had to be a mistake. I had submitted plans before installation, just as required. The previous board had already approved it, the city had signed off on it. I had paid out of pocket for a professional design that blended seamlessly with my house. How could they suddenly decide it was a violation? I took a deep breath and tried to approach it rationally. Maybe this was just some clerical error, an oversight from the new board. I gathered every document I had, the city permits, the contractor's compliance reports, the original HOA approval, and drafted a polite response, attaching copies of everything to prove my case. I sent it off, expecting common sense to prevail. Instead, I got a response from Karen herself, typed in an ice-cold, bureaucratic tone. Previous approvals are subject to review, and the current board has determined that your modification does not meet our updated standards. That was it. No explanation, no acknowledgement of my legal right to accessibility, just a flat rejection. That was when I realized this wasn't about rules. This was about control, ***. I wasn't about to let some overzealous HOA president strip me of my ability to enter my own home, so I started preparing for battle. The first thing I did was consult a disability rights lawyer. The moment I showed her the HOA's letters, she practically lit up. "Oh, they screwed up," she said, flipping through the paperwork. Under the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, HOAs cannot prevent reasonable modifications that are necessary for disabled residents. My ramp wasn't just legal, it was federally protected. Armed with this knowledge, I went on the offensive. I gathered support from my neighbors, especially the elderly residents who realized that one day, they might need similar accommodations. I documented every email, every letter, every conversation. I even started recording my interactions with board members, since my state allowed single-party consent. If they wanted to play dirty, I was going to be fully prepared. Then, things took a darker turn. When I requested official HOA records to prove my original approval, I was told they didn't exist. That didn't make sense. The previous board had signed off on my ramp, I had spoken to them, submitted documents, paid fees. Now, it was as if none of that had ever happened. That's when Maggie Reynolds, an older neighbor who had lived in the community for over a decade, pulled me aside one evening. She had proof that Karen was tampering with records. Apparently, Maggie had kept physical copies of old HOA meeting notes, including the one where my ramp was originally approved. When she checked the new digital versions available to homeowners, any mention of my ramp had been erased. Then came the bombshell. Maggie had overheard Karen bragging about it during a private conversation at a social event. "What they don't know won't hurt them," Karen had laughed to another board member, "he can't fight what doesn't exist." Maggie, being the no-nonsense woman she was, had recorded the entire exchange. With this new ammunition, I thought Karen's attack had reached its peak. But I had underestimated just how far she was willing to go. A few days later, I got a call from a city official, a building inspector. He asked me to confirm details about my ramp installation because a complaint had been filed. My stomach twisted. I didn't need to ask who had filed it. Karen was trying to get my city permits revoked. I met with the inspector, who seemed genuinely apologetic. He admitted that while everything appeared in order, pressure was being applied to reassess my modification. He didn't say it outright, but the message was clear. Someone in my HOA had been trying to push the city into overturning my permits. That was the moment my frustration turned into something deeper, pure, burning anger, Karen wasn't just enforcing some arbitrary rule. She wasn't just erasing records. She was actively trying to weaponize the government against me, to strip away my legal rights. She wanted me to feel powerless. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. I had expected Karen to back down when she realized I knew my rights. I had expected the board to at least acknowledge the legal reality of my situation. But instead of retreating, she doubled down, escalating her attacks in a way that made it clear, this wasn't about my ramp. It was about power, and Karen had no intention of losing. The next HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread about my battle with the board, and a surprising number of neighbors showed up, many of them whispering their frustrations about past HOA overreach. Some were just there for the drama, but others, people like Brian and Lisa Mitchell, a younger couple who had been fined for minor violations, had had enough of Karen's selective enforcement. They wanted to see if this was finally the moment someone stood up to her. I had come prepared. Armed with Maggie's recording of Karen admitting to tampering with HOA records, I stood up to challenge the board. "I have proof that this ramp was approved by the previous board," I began, "and I also have proof that those records have been deliberately altered. This isn't just an overreach of power, it's fraud." Karen's face was unreadable, but the other board members exchanged uneasy glances. Then, she did something I hadn't expected. She laughed, a smug, condescending chuckle. And then she said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, asterisk, for all we know, you don't even need that ramp. Asterisk. The room fell silent. Even those who had come just to watch the fireworks seemed stunned. Karen folded her arms. You've been parading that thing around, acting like it's some sacred object, but all I see is an unnecessary structure lowering property values. We have standards here. If we let you keep that, what's next? People turning their front yards into junkyards? Painting their houses neon green? She smirked. Maybe I should call the city and have them take another look at your medical records, too. A few gasps. Someone muttered, Jesus Christ. But the best part? Maggie was recording the whole thing. The moment she stopped speaking, Maggie sent the clip straight to the neighborhood's Facebook group. Within minutes, the comments exploded. Did she seriously just accuse a disabled man of faking it? This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. We're paying HOA fees to be bullied? The outrage spread like wildfire. And Karen? She had no idea. By the next morning, the backlash had begun. Brian and Lisa, who had publicly supported me at the meeting, suddenly found a violation notice in their mailbox. Their mailbox, of all things, was apparently an inch too high. Walter and Helen Thompson, the elderly couple considering a ramp of their own, received a preemptive warning from the HOA, strongly suggesting that any unapproved modifications would be subject to strict review. Karen was retaliating. Then came the private investigator. It was Lisa who tipped me off. She worked in real estate and recognized the man lingering around my property. He had been asking neighbors questions about me, where I worked before the accident, whether I really used the ramp as much as I claimed. The next day, my brother called. Hey, he said, his voice tight with concern. Some guy reached out to me, asking about your accident. He said he was an insurance rep, but something felt off. Thought you should know. I was livid. Karen had hired someone to dig into my past. She wasn't just trying to remove my ramp anymore, she was trying to discredit me entirely. Maybe she thought she could find some loophole, some technicality to undermine my legal protections. Maybe she was just desperate to make me look bad. Either way, she had crossed a line. That's when I decided to change tactics. I had been defending myself this whole time, playing by the rules, trying to get her to back down. But now, I was going on the attack. I started digging into her. Karen had positioned herself as the ultimate enforcer of HOA standards. She fined people for minor infractions, humiliated homeowners who didn't meet her expectations. But what if she wasn't holding herself to the same standards? It didn't take long to find exactly what I was looking for. While reviewing past HOA violations, I noticed something odd. Several homes had received fines for backyard renovations without proper approval. Decks, gazebos, patios, if you didn't submit a request, you got slapped with a fee. Except for one house. Karen's. Her property had undergone a massive backyard renovation, complete with an outdoor kitchen and stone patio. But there was no record of her submitting the required forms, no fines. No approvals. It got worse. With Maggie's help, I got access to HOA financial records. And there it was, **** a $9,700, community improvement, expense **** listed under discretionary spending. But the work? It had never been done for the neighborhood. It had been done for Karen's house. That was the moment I knew. She was finished. I didn't waste any time. The moment I had proof of Karen's unauthorized renovations and financial misconduct, I knew exactly what to do. This wasn't just about me anymore, this was about exposing a bully who had been weaponizing her authority while breaking the very rules she enforced. The first step was making sure everyone saw the truth. I compiled everything, screenshots of the HOA financial reports, timestamps proving the funds had been used for Karen's personal renovations, and records showing she never submitted the required approval forms. Then, I posted it all in the neighborhood Facebook group under the heading, "Are our HOA fees paying for Karen's backyard?" The response was immediate. Homeowners, many of whom had been fined for minor infractions, erupted in fury. "So we get fined for mailbox height, but she gets a free backyard renovation? Where did our HOA fees really go?" The post spread like wildfire, with dozens of comments pouring in within minutes. The community had tolerated Karen's authoritarian leadership for too long, but this? This was outright theft. Karen must have seen the backlash because, less than an hour later, the post disappeared. She had abused her admin powers to take it down. That only made people angrier. The neighborhood chat exploded with accusations. She was censoring information, covering up her corruption. People started resharing the evidence, emailing it to neighbors, demanding answers. Then came the recall petition. Maggie, Brian, and Lisa took the lead, organizing homeowners to force a recall election against Karen and her closest board allies. It didn't take long to get the required signatures. Within 48 hours, over 70% of homeowners had signed. The HOA bylaws required the board to acknowledge the petition, and a special election date was set. Karen tried to fight back. She sent out mass emails to the community, warning that removing her leadership would lead to disorder and a drop in property values. She claimed she had been misrepresented, calling the allegations slander and threatening legal action. But no one was buying it. It was too late. At the final HOA meeting before the vote, the atmosphere was tense. Karen, once confident and smug, looked visibly shaken. The board members who had supported her sat stiffly, eyes darting between angry homeowners. People demanded explanations. Where had their HOA money gone? Why had she ignored the rules she forced everyone else to follow? Then, I played the final card. "I'll modify my ramp," I said, standing up in front of the entire room, when Karen explains to a judge why she thinks her backyard upgrades were more important than following the same rules she enforced on everyone else. The silence was deafening. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since this nightmare began, she had no response. 2 days later, the recall election results came in. She lost. Badly. Karen and her closest board members were voted out in a landslide. The neighborhood had had enough. And just like that, her reign was over. Karen was gone, but the effects of her rule lingered. The new HOA board wasted no time undoing the damage she had done. One of their first acts was to formally approve my wheelchair ramp, ensuring that no one would ever challenge it again. But this fight had become about more than just my home. It had forced the entire neighborhood to take a hard look at how the HOA had been operating for years. Suddenly, homeowners who had once silently endured unfair fines and ridiculous restrictions were speaking up, questioning past decisions, and demanding real transparency. For the first time, the HOA wasn't just a group of enforcers dictating arbitrary rules. It was becoming what it should have been all along, a fair and balanced organization that actually served the community. The new board held open meetings where homeowners could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. They reviewed outdated policies, eliminated needless aesthetic restrictions, and implemented clear oversight to prevent another Karen from abusing power again. A few months later, Walter and Helen Thompson installed their own wheelchair ramp, something they had been afraid to do under Karen's leadership. Now, they didn't need to worry about secret fines or hostile retaliation. The neighborhood had changed, and for the better. As for Karen, she put her house up for sale within a month. Despite her self-proclaimed dedication to preserving property values, her name had become synonymous with corruption and pettiness. Word spread quickly, and potential buyers were warned about her reputation. Her house sat on the market for weeks, and when she finally sold, it was for significantly less than she had hoped. It was ironic. her own actions had done more damage to her home's value than my ramp ever could. Looking back, I realized this battle had been exhausting, but necessary. If I had backed down, if I had quietly complied, Karen would still be in power, and the HOA would still be a weapon used against homeowners instead of working for them. This fight wasn't just about my right to accessibility, it was about holding people accountable and making sure that power, once abused, was taken away. The biggest lesson? HOAs can be beaten. If you know your rights, document everything, and refuse to be intimidated, you can push back against unfair rules and change the system for the better. The moment people stop blindly accepting authority is the moment real change happens. So, have you ever felt powerless against an HOA, or a Karen in disguise? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.